Hey everyone, welcome to another exciting True North report. My name is Andrew Lawton, a fellow with True North, and with you here for the next little while as we talk about things that are happening in the world, in the country, things that are happening where there is a perspective that the mainstream media is missing out on. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't take much to elude what's the opposite of eagle eye? To elude the sparrow eye of the mainstream press. But we're here for you. I'm here for you. I've got your back. Thanks very much for tuning in. Depending on where you are in the country right now, you might actually be hunkered down in a secret bunker, not wanting to go outside at all. I won't bother turning my camera because I have enough of a hard time getting it to work under normal circumstances. But I'm surrounded by snow right now. I've shut down the windows, obviously, but I want to give you fair warning. There is a slight possibility that at some point during this broadcast, you'll hear like the loud thuds and scrapes and beeps of snowplows. It looks like it's plowed on my street, but I can't make any guarantees. I think they were out there at like 4 a.m., which, let me tell you, was absolutely lovely for my wife and I, sound asleep, and then hearing the giant backup sirens, because that's really what they are, of snowplows. But that is the price you pay for living in Canada. So regardless of where you are and how bad or not bad the snow is, I'm sure like BC is fine, but I think like all of Ontario, Quebec, everything like that is all pretty screwed up right now. So maybe you are stuck at work, or maybe you are stuck at home and didn't have to go to work. Either way, what you probably weren't doing is stuck with your channels set to CBC. If you were, though, you would have noticed that CBC had a bit of a weird story. And I say weird because the state broadcaster tended to think that it was a bombshell, but I'm failing to see what the actual bombshell part of it was. And this is from Mike Crawley, who's their chief legislative correspondent for Ontario politics. But this is a story that everyone will be interested in. The bombshell report from Mike Crawley at CBC is that Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, had a meeting, a secret, off the books, no one could know about meeting in October with Jordan Peterson. I know, cue shocks and gasps and all that. Yeah, so let's back up on a couple of things. The implication in this is that this meeting was somehow being hidden. In actuality, Doug Ford just doesn't publish his daily schedule. I mean, prime ministers, premiers, they get to decide whether they want to publish their whole schedule, a part of it, or none of it. He doesn't publish a daily update accounting for every single meeting he's had. But one of the meetings that Doug Ford had back in Ontario's legislative chambers in October was with Jordan Peterson, the University of Toronto professor who's become an internationally renowned free speech crusader, academic, and advocate for open inquiry. And Doug Ford met with him. That's the story. If you're waiting for more information, that's the story. And CBC ran like a 900-word piece that says nothing more than that Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, met with Jordan Peterson, a world-renowned academic and scholar. That's it. That is the story. So why does CBC care so much? Well, this is where we get into the CBC bias. Now, I'm going to read elements of this story because it's hilarious how far they go to try to make it seem like there's something bigger here than there actually is. For starters, because there isn't a public agenda that's put forward by Doug Ford's office, they had to file a Freedom of Information request, and the government gives them in response to that the day-by-day accounting of his calendar. So they got the information. I mean, there was no whistleblower. No one was, watergating this. They just asked, and the government said, all right, here you go. Here's Doug Ford's schedule. You just have to file the request. But this is it. Ontario Premier Doug Ford held a one-on-one meeting with Jordan Peterson a week after the controversial university professor publicly urged Ford to abolish the province's Human Rights Commission, CBC News has learned. The meeting was revealed in Ford's appointment calendar for October and November, obtained through a Freedom of Information request. CBC made the request because Ford is not providing the media with his daily public itinerary. CBC News cannot find any record of Ford or Peterson publicly mentioning that their Ontario 18th meeting took place. So they're trying to say here that, well, they met, but why didn't they? This is basically it. Why didn't they tweet about it? This is the question that CBC is saying, because this is the next paragraph. Ford tweeted about several of his other private meetings around that date, with Diane Martin, CEO of the Registered Practical Nurses Association, with Susan Lejeune, the British High Commissioner to Canada, with Tim Hudak, the former PC leader who's now the CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association. So what? They're saying, oh, well, he tweeted about some other meetings he had then. Why didn't he tweet about Jordan Peterson? And CBC doesn't come right out and say it, but you can tell that the network is trying to bring people to that conclusion that there was something being hidden about this, that there was something secret about this. And truth be told, is nothing of the sort. They asked the Premier's office what were they talking about, and the press secretary to the Premier, Ivana Yelich, said they were talking about free speech on college and university campuses. Like, why wouldn't they be? First off, Jordan Peterson is one of the only reasons that a lot of people in Canada are talking about free speech on college and university campuses. And Doug Ford, for his part, has made it a mission to restore free speech and open inquiry to these institutions. There's a reason he put that policy in place that I've talked about in past editions of this broadcast, that requires all publicly funded universities to have a free speech policy starting this month, starting January 1st. So there's never been a secret about it. So Doug Ford has a priority of free speech on campuses. Jordan Peterson is one of the foremost advocates for free speech on campus. The two of them meet. This isn't newsworthy. This shouldn't be surprising. And but this is the thing, though. They're upset because a week earlier, Jordan Peterson tweeted about Doug Ford. See, this is the only way journalism happens right now, is journalists watching Twitter. Like, this is the only way they get their stories. They stare at Twitter all day and hope something happens. And if nothing happens, they find like the one obscure tweet by a protected account with an egg as its profile that says, "Oh, I don't like this dancing" by Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, and boom, headline news all over the world. But this was the tweet that Peterson made on October 10th. "The faster the Ontario Human Rights Commission is abolished, the better, Ford Nation. There isn't a more dangerous organization in Canada, with the possible exception of the Ontario Institute for Studies and Education, OISE." And they're saying that Peterson was taking on the Ontario Human Rights Commission's decision to join a legal challenge against Doug Ford's government. He was opposing it. And look, I think the Human Rights Commission should be abolished as well. But believing that, first off, is a completely justifiable position. And secondly, it doesn't disqualify you from meeting with a politician, even if that's not what they were talking about. And it sounds from the Premier's office like that wasn't even the topic of discussion. It was about free speech issues more broadly. But you wonder why this is newsworthy and why the story kept going on. And they dig into the background of, oh, Jordan Peterson once said this about the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario. And this is my personal favorite. Ford's calendar for October and November shows no one-on-one meetings with any other Ontario university professors. So they're saying that the only way that it would have been justifiable for Jordan Peterson to get a meeting with Doug Ford is if Doug Ford also spoke to like the head of the gender studies department at Nipissing University that same week, or the head of the conflict studies and Harry Potter literary analysis degree program professor from the University of Windsor. It's like, well, that's the only Ontario professor. So Jordan Peterson in one context is this evil global superstar, and in the others he's just some Ontario university professor. It's hilarious because the media wants to fear him and delegitimize him at the same time. And you don't get both. You have to pick one. You have to either put someone up on a pedestal and say, this person's a big deal, they've got influence, they've got power, or this person's irrelevant and no one should pay attention to them. But you don't get to do both, and you certainly don't get to do both in the same news story. And when you look at this story, they've tried to lump it into another controversy about the Ontario government buying an OPP vehicle, and they've tried to make it then about the appointment of Ron Taverner as OPP commissioner. And they've taken this non-story, which is Doug Ford had a meeting with an Ontarian, and they've made it about, Doug Ford and the OPP and Doug Ford's calendar and transparency in government and Freedom of Information Acts and all of this stuff. And it's laughable because the NDP view of things, and I'll get to that more in a second, but the CBC is taking here the NDP view of it. The NDP view of Jordan Peterson is that just because we say that he's a bad guy, he's a bad guy. Because that is the implication. That is very much the implication here. This is only a story because they genuinely don't like what he stands for. And they don't need to say it to know that's what they're really inferring with this. Because I looked at some of the calendar entries that were in the FOI documents. And, there's a meeting with the lieutenant governor. There's a meeting. I mean, it's not, where's the story of Doug Ford met with Ontario lieutenant governor? What did they discuss? Well, who cares what they discussed? We're talking about a legitimate voice here. And I got into a discussion with an NDPer last week or 2 weeks ago on Facebook, and we were talking about hate speech on campus, free speech on campus, and that discussion that has really become quite central to a lot of the work that I do. And he's a believer that these things like safe spaces and all of that are not inherently bad things. And I said that, look, when you start defining or redefining hate, you are getting to this very dangerous territory. And I said, look at Jordan Peterson, for an example, thinking that he would agree with me that Jordan Peterson is an example of a legitimate voice. I said, here's a guy, he's a professor, he's respected, people may not like him, but he's not a hateful person. And he said, yes, Jordan Peterson's a great example of the type of speech that shouldn't be allowed. And I was baffled by it. I was absolutely baffled by it. And to be fair, he wasn't saying not allowed in the sense of, Jordan Peterson should be strung up and arrested. He was saying that, this is the example of the type of speech that challenges or threatens students on university campuses. And I wholeheartedly disagree with that. But it's interesting because this story ended up coming in a way back around to me. And I found it to be interesting. It was actually, I think my wife who pointed me out, because my wife knows what I do for a living, of course. So she thinks that I'm like just picking fights with people all day. And she had said, what did you do to so-and-so? And I said, I don't know. I haven't talked to so-and-so ever, or at least not in like the last 6 months. Why? They're like, oh, well, he's, going after you on Twitter. And I'm like, all right, well, I'll play ball here. And the person she was talking about is named Terence Kernaghan. And Terence Kernaghan is a member of provincial parliament. So if you're from Ontario, an MPP is a provincial legislator. If you're not from Ontario, it's the equivalent of an MLA. So a member of the provincial legislative assembly in Ontario. And he was elected in the riding next door to the one that I ran in. London North Centre is where Terence Kernaghan is now the MPP in the New Democratic Party caucus. And he linked to the CBC story about Doug Ford and Jordan Peterson. And this is what he wrote. Ford is personal friends with known homophobe Charles McVety and endorsed Andrew Lawton as his candidate in London. It's no surprise that he's now taking advice from a far-right figure like Peterson. So here we have the worldview of the NDP, because Terence Kernaghan is speaking for the NDP. When you're an NDP member of provincial parliament and you speak out like that, you are speaking on behalf of your party until the party says you're not. So Doug Ford and Jordan Peterson meet. He mints Jordan Peterson as far right. And then it becomes this conspiracy, this far-right conspiracy of all the other far-right hateophobes that are meeting with Doug Ford, and it becomes about me. Oh, I was a Doug Ford candidate in London. I'm a far-right hateophobe, he thinks. And Charles McVety, who's a head of Canada Christian College, and I don't know Charles well. I know that he believes what pretty much every evangelical Christian believes about a number of social issues. I've never heard anyone say that he has treated individual people with hate or with phobia. But it doesn't matter. It honestly doesn't matter to these people because they lump everyone they disagree with in the same category. So to an NDP member of provincial parliament, a school teacher by trade, it's all just this far-right friends group for Doug Ford. I'm part of it, and by the way, I'm in good company with Jordan Peterson, Doug Ford, and myself. I'm okay being in that club. But it's that the NDP and clearly the CBC think that club is in and of itself disqualifying of you. They think that is basically the thing that just pulls you out of the running from being a part of society when they frame a society in their terms. And I want to talk about Peterson for a second, because I know Jordan Peterson on I wouldn't say he's a friend, but I know him on a partly social level. I've crossed paths with him a number of times. I've interviewed him. I think he's genuinely a decent person. And I think he's genuinely a misunderstood person. And there are two reasons for that. One is that the people that hate him. And the other is that the people that love him want him to be everything to everyone. And this has been one of the big, I don't want to say frustrations with Peterson, but frustrations with Jordan Peterson's fans, is that because people like him and respect him and value him and admire him so much, and because he is such a thoughtful and smart person, people want to hold up his view on pretty much everything as being the gold standard. So, they'll have him talk about gun control. They'll have him talk about provincial politics. They'll have him talk about free speech. They'll have him talk about academia. They'll have him talk about Cambodian rice tariffs, probably, if the interview goes long enough. And it's not to say that he's not equipped to come up with an opinion on that, to study up, to read up. But I feel like a lot of people try to make Peterson everything to everyone. But irrespective of that, on the free speech issue, he's solid. But anyone who's ever read his books or talked to him at any great depth, or even watched other interviews with him, Jordan Peterson is not even someone you can characterize as a conventional right-winger. And this is what's fascinating. I mean, he had NDP ties back in the day on economic issues. He's not really, he doesn't really pontificate on them all that much anyway, but he's not a far-right figure. And it's fascinating to me, because he stands up for free speech, he's far right. That's all. That's all you need to do. Because he says, I don't like the idea of being forced by the power of the state to use a pronoun, and I stand up for free speech in other areas. Because he says that, he's far right. That's all it takes. Far right means that an NDPer thinks that you're disagreeable. If an NDPer disagrees with you on something, you are far right. And the fact that an NDP member of provincial parliament is not now taking aim at Jordan Peterson and Doug Ford having a meeting, and then lumping everyone he doesn't like into the same thing. Oh, Charles McVitie, Andrew Lawton. I mean, before you know it, if he finds out that the janitor at Queen's Park voted Conservative once, and Doug Ford, shook his hand in the hallway, the janitor is probably going to be far right before you know it. And it's disgusting. And if you want to hear what's more disgusting, and I find this to be hilarious, actually, Terence Kernaghan, who I don't think I've ever actually met. I don't. I saw him once. I was driving home, and it was a rainy day. This was like a month ago. And I saw him knocking on doors wearing a big orange poncho. And I want it noted that I could have driven my car straight through the puddle and soaked him in the orange poncho, and I didn't. So I took the moral high ground when I saw this guy. And then he goes, oh, Andrew Lawton's far right and Jordan Peterson and blah, 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 blah. It's like you just insert a coin in these socialists and they just go. But he or someone in his office has been hiding. I kid you not. On his Facebook page, he or someone in his office has been hiding any of the comments on it that are supportive of me or critical of him. So he posted this link, and Ford is personal friends, blah, 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 blah. And you look at it, and Facebook says there are 19 comments as of this point. Facebook says there are 19 comments. You open them up, and 2 of them are there. 2 of them are there. And last night I was checking this because it was kind of fun. I'd see people because I shared his post on my page, and I'd see people who are commenting, oh, I just gave him a piece of my mind, or and you go over and it's someone saying, Mr. Kernaghan, I disagree with you. I think Andrew Lawton is a nice fellow, and blah, blah, blah. And hidden. And someone was actively monitoring this, hiding any comment that he disagreed with. But to be clear, this is his Facebook page. I could not care less what he does with it. But I find it hilarious because this is what you're dealing with. And this is the same attitude, I think, that I'm going to make sure that no one on my Facebook sees comments that I disagree with, that it looks like it's just some big love fest. That's the same attitude that results in completely otherizing people that you encounter who you might not agree with. Because when you start saying so-and-so's far right, that's the same attitude that creates a bubble and an echo chamber around you. And it's that same attitude that is causing us a great many more problems and finding no solutions. And the problem is that people do not want to reach across. And, you know, I looked on Twitter, he just got absolutely skewered for it. And I normally don't get into Twitter fights. I really can't be bothered. But with this one, I responded because I know that he's a big boy and he can handle it. I don't want to do what, you know, people like Michael Corrin do and whatnot, which is just find some random on Twitter with 3 followers and try to ruin their life. But if you find, you know, people that you disagree with that you know can take it, sure, I'll get into a back and forth with them. But there's no back and forth. And in fact, if I commented on his Facebook, it would have been deleted by now. So I could have written this great, you know, essay or something, but, you know, no one but myself would see it. And it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing when you are, first off, that thin-skinned. But secondly, when you believe that the Premier of Ontario, who believes in free speech, should not talk to someone else who believes in free speech, and when you believe that that belief makes you far right, how do we get out of that hole? And I don't think they want to get out of the hole. I think they're okay with it. And I've long said that it absolutely used to be where if a policy or a decision or a story or whatever was threatening somehow free speech, that was an argument that could sell people. You could say, well, actually, this thing that person X said is not good because it threatens free speech. Now the audience that you're saying that to does not necessarily agree that free speech is a good thing. So if you say, well, person X says this thing and that's anti-free speech, they're going to say, so what? And you're going to have to go back a step and start selling them on whether free speech is a good thing. And you won't get an agreement because now we've created this culture. And I saw Jonathan Haidt, the professor who wrote the book, The Righteous Mind, is coming to Toronto in a few weeks. And I'm going to try to go to that because he's a great guy. But you look at this discussion that we're having about free speech, which shouldn't be a left-right issue. And I know a great many people on the left that are unequivocally in support of free speech, but they are part of that old guard of the left. They're very much part of that old guard of the left, the people that were in that Paul Martin, Jean Chrétien era, or even before of the Liberal Party, or the NDPers even, that were the actual countercultural activists of the 1960s that were fighting for freedom. They were fighting against authoritarianism, and they have little to no patience for the culture against free speech that we have now. But the free speech question should not be left versus right. And the number of people on the left that stand up for free speech is dwindling. And the ones that do very quickly are pushed over. And you look at Frances Widdowson as a great example. She's a Marxist. She's an honest-to-goodness Marxist. She's as left-wing as they come, but she has no patience for censorship. And because of that, she's thrust away. She's thrust aside by the left. And Lindsay Shepherd, again, a self-professed leftist, believes all the things liberals believe, still believes a lot of the things that liberals believe, but because of her belief in free speech, she's a white supremacist. Jordan Peterson, who, if you listen to his views, preaches personal responsibility, preaches against toxic masculinity, the real toxic masculinity, preaches about the importance of family, preaches about the importance of charity and compassion, all of these things. And he's far right and white supremacist because he believes in free speech. The left has prioritized its hatred of free speech above its love of all other things. I don't think if Tommy Douglas, the father of Medicare, were to come back from the grave and say, you know, I don't like censorship, I feel like he would be cast aside as being a white supremacist racist now. And the same as anyone else that the liberals have lionized. And CBC goes along with it. And what's worse is that, I mean, CBC didn't in this story make any accusations. CBC didn't say, oh, Jordan Peterson's far right. That was the NDP. But CBC published this story, and you could tell they wanted to lead people to that conclusion. Because by publishing this story, they're saying that it is newsworthy that Doug Ford met with Jordan Peterson, and it's newsworthy that neither tweeted about. Do you tweet about everything you do? Do you tweet like, and again, it would be petty because then it would be, oh, Doug Ford bragging about the fact that he met with Jordan Peterson. Like, there's no way to win. These people hate you. These people hate you. They hate the right. They hate what the right stands for. And they hate the idea that you do not see the world the way they do. And that's not everyone on the left, but it's the subset of that anti-free speech left that we need to be on guard for. And this is something that is going to get worse before it gets better, because we're already seeing that decline. We're already seeing that get worse. I mean, my response, and I think Alex Pearson, who's a great radio host in Toronto, had the same response. She retweeted the CBC story of, Doug Ford met with Jordan Peterson, and she's like, who cares, or so what? It was something like that. And that was my reaction. At first, I didn't even read the story. I didn't even read the story because I didn't realize how much this might actually have been newsworthy. And I interestingly enough, last week, I think it was last week, it might have been 2 weeks ago, someone was sending me photos from some big public party. It might have been Ford Fest that Doug Ford had in his backyard. Or, no, it wouldn't have been Ford Fest because that was offsite, but some party, some big backyard barbecue Doug Ford had. And there were pictures posted everywhere. People were getting pictures with Doug Ford. There were students there, and Jordan Peterson was there. And I saw that, and I was like, oh, cool, Jordan Peterson went to Doug Ford's party. Little did I know that could have been a news story. If I just saved that picture, which was public, and posted it, and I said, Jordan Peterson photographed in the same country as Doug Ford, that would have been a story. That would have been a story, because two people that the left hates got in a room together, and the left cannot contain that much hatred. That's really all there is to it. The left cannot contain that much hatred when you put two people that it's decided to declare the enemy in the same room. And it's why it's so important to break through that mainstream media bubble. I will give you just one little plug before I go here. That's something we're doing at True North. We're breaking through that bubble. It's important work, especially in an election year, but we can't do it alone. I've got a link in the chat over there. That is not there at all. It's over there. I forget these things are in reverse. And you can click and join our Heritage Club. It's just a few bucks a month, and it keeps the lights on here and lets the work that we're doing continue to shine, because we know the mainstream media is not going to be on your side. So if you can help us out, really do appreciate it. Andrew Lawton here for True North. We'll be back next week. Thank you. God bless, and good day, Canada.